So, we're going to be looking at some different things over the next few weeks, and tonight we're going to be talking about miracles or miraculous events in the Old Testament. So before we get into that, what do you think, and there's no right or wrong answer, what's a miracle?
Something that happens outside of the ordinary, either timing or natural order of things.
Okay. Other thoughts?
Say somebody's had a heart attack, but they're not dead, they come back.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I think there's lots of little miracles that happen every day that
We don't even recognize or see or acknowledge.
Right.
And you know, back when I was first learning about doing sermons, whatever your key word was, you were supposed to pull out the dictionary table of Webster thought of it, which I always thought was kind of hokey. But this is something I got off the internet. It said a miracle is a surprising and welcome event that's not explicable by natural or scientific laws and is therefore considered to be the work of a divine agency. Or a highly improbable or extraordinary event, development, or accomplishment that brings very welcome consequences. Quote, it was a miracle that more people hadn't been killed or injured, unquote. Or an amazing product or achievement or an outstanding example of something. A machine that was a miracle of design. All those have a kind of the idea of something special or something not expected or even something you can't explain. Like I said on Sunday, I was giving up feeling like I have to explain everything. So often people say, well, why this and why that? And I'm really comfortable anymore saying, I don't know. You know, it's up to God. But look first at the Old Testament, because when we think of miracles, I always think first of Jesus. Water into wine, the healings that I talked about last Sunday, that kind of thing. But there have been miracles going on ever since creation. Creation itself was a miracle. How could you explain this huge abyss of nothing, and out of that God starts putting stuff together and the world's created? Do I understand how that happened? No. Do I know how long it took? No, and I don't care. The important thing is we got here. We got here. So we're going to be looking at some of these tonight, and if we get through all of them, it's fine. If not, we'll look at the rest of them next week. With each one of these from the Hebrew Scriptures, the Old Testament, we're going to be looking at who was involved in it, what happened, and why did it happen. And you can guess that the why will often be, I don't know. Now, all I've given us is the scripture for it. So we'll be looking at those, and Sherry doesn't have to read because she intentionally didn't bring her glasses tonight. We're not going to necessarily read the whole account, but the first one is in Genesis 7 through 8. I don't think I've ever had anybody ask me, where's Genesis? You know, you have people say, where's this book or that book? Genesis 7 through 8. If your Bible has any kind of headings, you know that this is a story of what? The flood. The flood. You know, it's really cool when you study about the flood because most major religions have a flood story in their background somewhere too. We're going to look at this for just a minute, and you know most of it. Just kind of skip through it. This is after God's already told Noah how to build the ark, and again, the specifics are just amazing. How big, how long, how wide. It says, chapter 7, verse 1, go into the ark, you and your whole family, because I found you righteous in this generation. Take with you 7 of every clean animal, a male and its mate, and 2 of every unclean animal, a male and its mate, and also 7 of every kind of bird, male and female, to keep their various kinds alive throughout the earth. 7 days from now I'll send rain on the earth for 40 days and 40 nights, and I'll wipe from the face of the earth every living creature I've made. So who do you guess is going to be the main character in this event, this miraculous event? No. Noah. Noah. Now, did anything bother you in those first few verses?
7 bothered me.
You know, that's where you come up with, why do we have to have all these mosquitoes? And who put bed bugs on the ark? And that kind of thing. And again, some of these are numbers in the Hebrew faith. 7 was a number of perfection. And so we don't know why these numbers were given exactly, but it was really important, especially that the clean animals be brought also. It always kind of bothered me that the ones that quote unquote, and you said, did this really happen? How did they get all those animals in the ark? I don't know, let's just look at it like it's written. It's kind of sad that if you weren't the chosen 7 of your denomination, of your species, then you were going to be wiped out. I love the cartoons that have the 2 dinosaurs on a little island and go, was that today? But, and why, so the who we know is Noah. You know the rest of the story about what happened. It rained 40 days and 40 nights. And how did they ever get off the ark? Do you remember? It landed on Mount Ararat. If you do crossword puzzles, you're going to run into that word a lot, Ararat. And the first time they sent out, I'm getting a little ahead of the story here, but the first time they would send out birds every now and then. And again, I would worry they didn't come back. Well, sure enough, they sent out the first bird, and it didn't come back. It did come back because there wasn't anywhere to land. And the next one they sent out didn't come back because it had found dry land. I've often kind of worried about what happened with all those birds at that time. But the question is, why did the flood happen? It was obviously a miracle. At that point, from what we can gather from Scripture, there had never been rain before because the earth had been watered by groundwater coming up. Can you imagine what it was like when those first drops started to fall? And Moses had told him it wasn't just going to be a shower, it wasn't just going to be a squall, it was going to be a flood. So why did this whole story happen? You remember the background? The human race is, getting kind of big now. They're growing a little bit. Somebody, if you have your Bible, turn over to chapter 6 and read verses 5 through 8. Chapter 6, verses 5 through 8. God saw that human evil was out of control. People thought evil, imagined evil, evil from morning to night. God was sorry that God had made the human race in the first place. It broke God's heart. God said, I'll get rid of my ruined creation and make a clean sweep, people, animals, snakes, and bugs, and birds, the works. I'm sorry I made them. There's this really important word in the Bible. The next word is 3 letters, and it's but. But Noah was different. God liked what he saw in Noah. Or in the other translation, Noah found grace in the eyes of the Lord. Now, did God make a mistake? Is that what happened? He says, I regret I ever did it. I think the mistake was giving people free will, because then they can make those choices. And so he didn't just say, I'm going to blow up this planet and I'll go find Mars or Pluto. He's going to start over. Start over. So that was the reason that the flood came. What was the positive out of it? Creation got to start over. Creation got to start over. Sometime not tonight, but go on and read the rest of the story. It always amazes me that here Noah is saved with his family, these animals, and then just like the rest of it, sometimes when things have been so good, things get a little off track. So Noah, the flood, and the why was to start over creation, to show that God loved us enough to start over. Have you ever just gotten so disgusted with somebody you want to just write them off? And sometimes we have to look at it a different way. Or we bless them on to let somebody else help them in some way or another. Let's look at the second miracle on here. Genesis 19:26. Miracles aren't always big, happy things. Remember we said they were unusual or unexpected things. This is kind of in the story of Sodom and Gomorrah. And starting at verse 15. Chapter 19, verses 15. At the break of day, the angel pushed Lot to get going. Hurry, get your wife and 2 daughters out of here before it's too late and you're caught in the punishment of the city. Lot was dragging his feet. The men grabbed Lot's arm and the arms of his wife and daughters. God was so merciful to them and dragged them to safety outside the city. When they had them outside, Lot was told, now run for your life. Don't look back. Don't stop anywhere on the plain. Run for the hills or you'll be swept away. But Lot protested, no, masters, you can't mean it. I know you've taken a liking to me and have done me an immense favor in saving my life, but I can't run for the mountains. Who knows what terrible thing might happen to me in the mountains and leave me for dead? Look over there, the town is close enough to get to. It's a small town. Hardly anything to it. Let me escape there and save my life. It's a mere wide place in the road. All right, Lot, if you insist, I'll let you have your way, and I won't stamp out the town you've spotted, but hurry up, run for it. I can't do anything until you get out of here, until you get there. That's why the town was called Zoar, that is small town. The sun was high in the sky when Lot arrived at Zoar. Then God rained brimstone and fire down on Sodom and Gomorrah, a river of lava from God out of the sky, and destroyed these cities and the entire plain and everyone who lived in the cities and everything that grew from the ground. Important word again. But Lot's wife looked back and turned into a pillar of salt. Wow. We know who the who is, right? Lot and his family. And part of the miracle is that they were saved from the destruction of Sodom and Gomorrah. And we don't need to go through that whole story. Many of you have already been through that with me in Homosexuality in the Bible. But his wife turns around and looks, and she's what? Turned into a pillar of salt. What's that about? Why did that happen? Yeah.
It's kind of like if you look back at your past, something would happen that would in your future.
Mm-hmm. Some people think she was still so attached to what was being destroyed. You know, you hear that all the time about somebody's house is on fire and they run into a burning house to, you know, save their grandma's picture or something and end up being destroyed themselves. I think also that some of it had to do with, like you said, Mo, when we let our past pull us down. Or not even pull us down, but get us stuck. Get us stuck. You know, if we live in the past, we're going to be stuck. We're going to be stuck. I was talking to somebody today, and they had lived here 20 years ago. And they'd been gone for a long time, and they came back and they said, you know, some of my friends are still in the same place they were 20 years ago. They still think, you know, it's important to be out at the bars 3 or 4 nights a week. And this person said, you know, I've learned there's other things we can be doing. Not there's anything wrong with the bar, don't get me wrong. But we can't stay stuck in that past. So Sodom, Lot and his family, and part of the miracle was that they were saved, and part of it was that lesson miracle, that Lot's wife. It's interesting, we don't even know her name. You notice people in the Bible, that they're somebody's wife or somebody's child, and we don't even know their name. There are other people that can give you all kinds of explanations, like I said about the miracles on Sunday. They can tell you all these reasons why it could have been that the fire and brimstone caught up with her, and you know, or it's where the waters washed up and had salt in them, and it doesn't matter all that part. The important thing is that she was told to keep moving, and she didn't. Now, I don't think if God tells you to go do something and you don't go, you're going to turn into a pillar of salt. Some of us have too much salt in our diet already. But, you know, it is a real lesson of looking forward. Looking forward. Let's do one more in Genesis here. Genesis 21. Genesis 21, verse 1, God visited Sarah exactly as God said God would. God did to Sarah what God promised. Sarah became pregnant. You remember this story, Abraham and Sarah. They were both older than dirt, way past baby age. think about it sometimes, you think, what in the world? Can you imagine? Okay, I'm going to pick on Pat because she hasn't been here in a while. Can you imagine at Pat's age if suddenly she was pregnant?
That'd be
Lots of miracles. That'd be a major, it'd be a capital M miracle.
especially if it's expected.
Hey, you're going to make a miracle, make it a big one.
That's right.
But you know, I mean, and these people were like 90 and 100. It's always amazed me, and this is, probably shouldn't put this because it's going to be on the tape, maybe you'll flip it out. It always amazed me they kept trying. They kept trying. But God had promised Sarah and Abraham, next year you're going to have a baby. And if you remember, what was Sarah's reaction to that? Do you remember when God said that? She laughed. Like, yeah, I bet. Yeah, I bet. And gave Abraham a son in his old age, and at the very time God had set. Abraham named him Isaac. When his son was 8 days old, Abraham circumcised him just as God had commanded. So what's the miracle there? The baby. That's part of it. The other miracle is Sarah and Abraham followed what God had set for them to do. I don't really think this was like an immaculate conception, you know. And even though it made no sense, how often in our lives does God lead us to do something that makes no sense on one level? And those are sometimes, if it makes all sense, I always worry about it because maybe it's me. Maybe it's me wanting to do it. But the miracle was, yes, the birth of the baby, but also the fact that they continued to walk in these steps that God had set for them. So the story goes on. The story goes, I love teaching the Old Testament. I'd love to do another through the Bible thing with the Old Testament. The story goes on, you know, they ended up in Egypt and they're being servants to Pharaoh, and Moses gets found out about, and Moses goes to take care of them and all that good stuff with the movie. Go to Exodus 14:21 or thereabouts. By this time, they've been walking around for a while, and they're, you know, just kind of worried what's going on, and and they begin to question and get upset with Moses. They get ready to leave. In verse 10, as Pharaoh approached, the Israelites looked up and saw the Egyptians coming at them. They were totally afraid. They cried out in terror to God. They told Moses, weren't the cemeteries large enough in Egypt? You had to take us out here in the wilderness to die? I love these griping complaints they get. Can we just stay in Egypt and die as servants, worked to death? What have you done to us, taking us out of Egypt? Back in Egypt, didn't we tell you this would happen? Didn't we tell you? Leave us alone here in Egypt. We're better off as slaves in Egypt than as corpses in the wilderness. You go back to the movie, the Ten Commandments. When they first left out of Egypt, did they look upset like this? You remember they were all excited because Moses was promising to take them somewhere else? And Moses, you know, they talk about the patience of Job. I think we ought to talk about the patience of Moses. Moses spoke to the people, don't be afraid, stand firm and watch God do God's work of salvation for you today. Take a good look at the Egyptians today because you're never going to see them again. God will fight the battle for you. You keep your mouth shut. God said to Moses, why cry out to me? Speak to the Israelites. Order them to get moving. Hold your staff high and stretch your hand out over the sea. Split the sea. The Israelites will walk through and the sea on dry ground. Meanwhile, I'll make sure the Egyptians keep up their stubborn chase. I'll use Pharaoh and his entire army, his chariots and horsemen, to put my glory on display, so the Egyptians will realize that I am God. The angel of God that had been leading the camp of Israel now shifted and got behind them. I think it's kind of funny to get behind them, maybe nudge them along. And the pillar of cloud that had been in front of them also shifted to the rear. The cloud was now between the camp of Egypt and the camp of Israel. The cloud enshrouded one camp in darkness and flooded the other with light. The two camps didn't come near each other all night. Then Moses stretched out his hand over the sea, and God, with a terrific east wind all night long, made the sea go back. He made the sea dry ground, the sea waters split. So what's the miracle here? Parting of the Red Sea. Parting of the Red Sea. Again, sort of a double whammy miracle, because parting of the Red Sea, and they're able to get over on dry land. You say, how did that happen? They're not even sure there was a, Just go with the story. Just go with the story, okay? They get across, and they're able then to keep going into the Promised Land. If you know the rest of the story, you know the Egyptians did continue their chase. And what happened to them? They drowned. They drowned it. They got swallowed up. I don't know if you ever had a chance to go to the place out in California where they, MGM Studios, where they show how they part the Red Sea. It was the strangest thing. It was so hokey. It was like really weird. And I don't understand how that happened. I can't imagine the kind of wind that would split it. To me, the wind would just keep blowing it all upstream, but I'm not God, so I don't have to worry about that. But the miracle was that the sea was cleared so they could go through, that they could continue on their journey. Very important words, phrase in that I read. Look back at the Egyptians because you'll never have to see them again. Kind of feeds into the Lot story. What if they had spent all their time on the shore looking back and being scared? What would have happened? The Egyptians would have killed them. No, the Egyptians would have herded them up, taken back to be slaves, but they would have been put back into captivity. But because they kept going, they kept going. Do you ever have any problems with that story? Sometimes I think I'm the only one that goes, that doesn't make sense. Later on, we'll see another time, and we're not going to look at it on here, but we'll see another time when they're traveling through the wilderness, and they're getting ready to go into the Promised Land, and once again, the waters have to part. Now, not a lot of people were left from that time who remember the last time. But you know, you hear those family stories, and sometimes you believe them, and sometimes you think somebody got a little excited with them. Flip over to 16, still out on that journey in the wilderness. Sometime I hope you can find this chart. I didn't have it with me today, but it shows, based on the places they mentioned, what a circuitous route they made going through the Promised Land. But if they had just gone straight across, it would have taken them a matter of days, maybe a few weeks. But instead, they wandered around for 40 years. What happens in chapter 16? I wish you could hear Nancy Wilson's sermon on this. It was the funniest thing. Because once again, I can't say that word, they're complaining about how things are. Once again, they're fussing at Moses for having taken them out. And taken them out into the wilderness. I always forget that he took them out of slavery. He took them out into the wilderness. Verse 12, God spoke to Moses, I've listened to the complaints of the Israelites, which always made me feel good because I mean God hears my gripes. Okay. Now tell them, at dusk you'll eat meat, and at dawn you'll eat your fill of bread, and you'll realize that I am God, your God. Okay, but they're out in the wilderness. What kind of meat are they going to find? What kind of bread are they going to find? You're not going to go buy a Rainbow store that has leftover bread. That evening, quail flew in and covered the camp. And in the morning, there was a layer of dew all over the camp. When the layer of dew had lifted, there on the wilderness ground was a fine, flaky something, as fine as frost on the ground. The Israelites took one look and said to one another, man, who? What is it? They had no idea what it was. So Moses told them, it's the bread God has given you to eat. And these are God's instructions. Gather enough for each person, about 2 quarts per person. Gather enough for everyone in your tent. And they were to do this every day except for the Sabbath. Now, nobody really knows what that manna was. And again, it could have been communion wafers dropping out of the sky. But one theory is that there were certain insects in that part of the country, that their excrement was very protein rich. And when, I can't remember what the insect is now, but when that happened, it would dry in little flakes. And Moses didn't want to tell him it's bug poo, so he just said, it's manna. You know, it's manna. What is this manna? It's like, you know, when you try to give a kid or an animal a pill, you don't want to tell them what it is. You know, oh, look, it's wrapped up in cheese. It must be good, you know. So the miracle was that their complaint about it, you know, it was almost a legitimate complaint. They're out wandering around in the wilderness. They're hungry. And the quail come in, and quail don't usually fly over in that area. But they came and they could get it, they could cook it, and they could do it with that. And then, because you have to have a little bread with your meat, depending on which Weight Watchers list you're on, they also had the manna. It's interesting because later on we find out they get kind of tired of that also. But, you know, things go on. Going on down through verse 28, God said to Moses, how long are you going to dissipate my commandments, not follow my instructions? Don't you see that God has given you the Sabbath? So on the 6th day, he gives you bread for 2 days. So each of you stay home, don't go home, don't leave home on the 7th day. So the people quit working on the 7th day. The Israelites named it manna, meaning, what is it? It looked like a coriander seed, whitish, and it tasted like a cracker with honey. I don't want to imagine. This is God's command. Keep a 2-quart jar of it, an omer, for future generations, so they can see the bread I fed you in the wilderness after I brought you out of Egypt. Moses told Aaron, take a jar and fill it, place it before God, keeping it safe for future generations. Aaron did what God commanded Moses. He set it aside before the testimony to preserve it. And the Israelites ate the manna for 40 years until they arrived in the land where they would settle down. They ate manna until they reached the border of Canaan. Now, I would think they'd get kind of tired of that after a while, wouldn't you? But if that's all you had, that would be another thing. It would be another situation. So the who? Israelites, Moses and the Israelites. The what? They got food from heaven. And the why? Partly so they quit complaining. So they could have the strength and the energy they needed to complete the journey. Again, God didn't give them, you know, grapes and apples falling from the sky. That would have been cool. But he gave them what they needed to survive and to get where God was leading them. And I think that applies to us today too. You know, I just can't take these stories and leave them in isolation. I think that when we're open to it, God will give us what we need to get through. Will it always be lobster tail and, you know, shrimp? Well, that'd be kind of bad for the Israelites. No, but God will give us both food-wise and otherwise what we need to get through. I was talking to some people the other night, and they were asking about the food pantry. And this one woman said, I just can't imagine not having any food. I've just never been in that place. And I told her my story you've heard before about tuna gravy, biscuits and gravy. Things were really tight in my house one time. This is when I was getting ready to finish my ministry plan preparation. And we didn't have much in the house. I got ready to go to work that morning, and my partner at that time had made some scratch biscuits out of I don't know what. I don't want to know. And she'd taken a can of tuna and mixed it with a little bit of milk and made this gravy. It was awful. It was, I still can taste it. It was terrible. But you know, God worked a miracle in that because I went to work pretty upset. A friend came and borrowed my car, and usually when he borrowed it, he kept it for a couple of hours. Well, it was 15 minutes of time to go home. He hadn't brought my keys back. He comes in right as I was getting off, hands me my keys. He said, you're headed home? I said, yeah. So what happened? He said, I just needed the car a while. When I went out to get in my little Chevette hatchback, the whole hatchback was full of bags of groceries because he had known what I was upset about, you know? And that lasted a long time. And I never, ever, ever, ever ate tuna gravy again. Ever. this is a fun one. Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers. Numbers 22. See, I made a mistake when I wrote down. I had to go back and correct all your papers. Numbers 22. This is a fun story in the sense of, I tease people about this sometimes they don't know the story. Chapter 22. There's some people having some issues here when they're traveling still in the wilderness. And I don't want to go through the whole long story. But verse 10, Balaam said to God, Balak, son of Zippor, king of Moab, sent me this message. A people that has come out of Egypt covers the face of the land. Now come and put a curse on them, for perhaps then I will be able to fight them and drive them away. Because you know, it wasn't an easy time getting into all this. But God said to Balaam, do not go with them. You must not put a curse on these people because they are blessed. The next morning, Balaam got up and said to Balak's princes, go back to your own country, for the Lord has refused to let me go with you. So the Moabite princes returned to Balak and said, Balaam refuses to come with us. Balak sent out other princes, more numerous and more distinguished than the first. They came to Balaam and said, this is what Balak, son of Zippor, said, do not let anything keep you from coming to me, because I will reward you handsomely and do whatever you say. Come and put a curse on these people. Back and forth, back and forth. 20. That night God came to Balaam and said, since these men have come to summon you, go with them, but do only what I tell you. Balaam got up in the morning, sat on his donkey, and went with the princes. But God was very angry when he went, and the angel of the Lord stood in the road to oppose him. Balaam was riding on his donkey, and his 2 servants were with him. When the donkey saw the angel of the Lord standing in the road with a drawn sword in his hand, she turned off the road into a field. Balaam beat her to get her back on the road. Doesn't say that Balaam saw this angel, right? But the donkey did. He took off in the field. Then the angel of the Lord stood in a narrow path between the 2 vineyards with walls on both sides. When the donkey saw the angel of the Lord, she pressed close to the wall, crushing Balaam's foot against it. So he beat her again. Oh, poor donkey.
Yeah.
Then the angel of the Lord moved on ahead and stood in a narrow place. There was no room to turn, neither to the right or the left. Isn't it amazing the steps God went through to try to keep Balaam from doing this? Think about that next time you run into a brick wall on something you think you really want to do. When the donkey saw the angel of the Lord, she lay down under Balaam, and he was angry and beat her with his staff. And the Lord opened the donkey's mouth.
Uh-oh.
Doesn't this sound like Shrek? Opened the donkey's mouth, and she said to Balaam, what have I done to you to make you beat me these 3 times? Balaam answered the donkey, you have made a fool of me. If I had a sword in my hand, I'd kill you right now. The donkey said to Balaam, am I not your own donkey, which you've always ridden to this day? Have I been in the habit of doing this to you? No. Then the Lord opens Balaam's eyes, and he saw the angel of the Lord standing in the road with a sword drawn. So he bowed low and fell on face down. The angel of the Lord asked him, why have you beaten your donkey these 3 times? I've come here to oppose you because your path is a reckless one before me. The donkey saw me and turned away from me these 3 times. If she had not turned away, I would certainly have killed you by now, but I would have spared her. I'm going to kill you, but I'll make your donkey be okay. Balaam said to the angel of the Lord, I have sinned. I did not realize you were standing in the road to oppose me. Now if you are displeased, I will go back. The angel of the Lord said to Balaam, go with the men, but speak only what I tell you. So Balaam went with the princes. And you can read the rest of the story about what he finally did say. So who was involved in this? Who was involved in this miracle? The donkey and Balaam. Got to put him in there. He has to get a little bit of credit here. And the miracle was that the donkey, at least, saw this message from God and continued to slow Balaam down. Now, the why did this donkey speak? To keep Balaam from getting killed by the angel. I was thinking about this today, and I thought, there are times when some of the most renowned and known and educated and learned people will try to tell me something, and I won't listen. And somebody I totally unexpect will tell me the same thing, and I'll listen. Remember when you were a kid Your mom or dad could tell you something you didn't want to pay attention, but if the neighbor said it, then it was truth. Then it was truth. I think part of the story behind this one is don't narrow your understanding of how God's going to speak to you. Now, I surely hope that Rudy doesn't start talking to me. Even if he's seeing an angel of the Lord. He does it sometimes. He'll just be there and all of a sudden he'll go. Sometimes we thought it was a bug, so if he sees a bug, he does the same thing. I keep telling Joanne he's seeing ghosts. He's seeing ghosts. But if he starts speaking to me, it'll be kind of scary. But it may not be a donkey, maybe another kind of, yes. But it may be somebody who has a word for you. And sometimes we get to be the donkey. We get to be the one who can see something that somebody else can't see. Or we have a different understanding of it. What would make somebody listen to you if you told them something pretty far out different? Why would they listen to you? Because they're afraid to run into an angel of the Lord with a sword drop. Sometimes people will take it from one of us because they know we've walked that path. We've been through that. If you want to talk about knee or back surgery or hip surgery, you know who to talk to here. They'll tell you how it goes. Don't come ask me because I don't know. I just know what they've told me. I don't know about that either. But sometimes it's because they know we've walked that path. Sometimes it's because they trust our discernment. They trust that we've been able to see through things before. And sometimes we're like Balaam. We don't listen the first time, or the second time, or the third time. Don't beat me if I tell you something you don't want to listen. That's fine. But we have to learn to listen, be open to how God's going to speak. You following that? You ever been to some time when you got a message and you thought, I didn't expect to hear that? It may be in the music, it may be in the sermon, it may be something you see, maybe something you see on Facebook. So we have to be open so that even if it is a donkey talking to us, we understand. Isn't that one of the funniest stories though? I mean, it's sad for the donkey, but I always enjoy saying something about God would let Balaam's ass talk, they might let you talk. Next one's one of my favorite stories, Elijah and his situation in 1 Kings 17. Keep going, you're right into 1 Kings. Notice I put these all in order so they come through the Bible in the right order here. You know, Elijah was this really cool prophet. And he was one of those itinerant type people. He didn't have a job per se, and he would just stay wherever he could stay, whatever he could do. And some other great stories around his life there. One of the things that seemed to help a lot of times, Elijah would get help from widows. I always thought that was kind of interesting because, Jesus got a lot of his help from the women that followed him. And when he went to the widows for help, they were often the poorest people. But look at chapter 17, verse 12. Go back to 10. So he went to Zarephath. When he got to the town gate, a widow was there gathering sticks. He called to her and said, "Would you bring me a little water in a jar so I can have a drink?" And as she was going to get it, he called him, "Please bring me a piece of bread." She looks at him and I can just see the eye roll, okay? "As sure as the Lord your God lives, I don't have any bread, only a handful of flour in a jar and a little oil in a jug. I've gathered a few sticks to take home and make a meal for myself and my son, that we may eat it and die." Elijah said to her, "Don't be afraid. Go home and do as you have said, but first make a small cake of bread for me from what you have and bring it to me. And then make something for yourself and your son. For this is what the Lord, the God of Israel, says. The jar of flour will not be used up, and the jug of oil will not run dry, until the day of the Lord gives rain on the land." Amazing, next few words. She went away and did as Elijah had told her. It's not the end of the story yet. She went away and did as Elijah told her. She's going to make one more meal for she and her son. But she does what he says first. So there was food every day for Elijah and for the woman and her family, for the jar of flour was not used up, and the jug of oil did not run dry, in keeping the word of the Lord spoken by Elijah. You say, well, that doesn't make any sense. How does that happen? That's why they're called miracles. Here's the other part of the miracle. Sometime later, the son of the woman who owned the house became ill. He grew worse and worse, and finally stopped breathing. She said to Elijah, "What do you have against me, man of God? Did you come to remind me of my sin and kill my son?" I mean, here she's been faithful. She's trusted. She's been getting all this food that God had promised, and now her kids die. Now, that's bad enough. But if she's a widow and her only child is a son, that was the only hope of surviving she had as he got older. Because there wasn't any Social Security, there weren't any food banks, And so I can understand her a little bit of anger there. Elijah says, "Give me your son." He took him from her arms and carried him to the upper room where Elijah was staying, and laid him on the bed. He cried out to the Lord, "O Lord my God, have you brought tragedy upon us, upon this widow that I am staying with, by causing her son to die?" And he stretched himself out on the boy 3 times and cried to the Lord, "O Lord my God, let this boy's life return to him." And the Lord heard Elijah's cry, and the boy's life returned to him, and he lived. Elijah picked up the child and carried him down from the room into the house, gave him to his mother, and said, "Look, your son is alive." The woman said to Elijah, "Now I know that you're a man of God, and the word of the Lord from your mouth is truth." You reckon? You reckon? Sorry, I've got a little news tonight. So, who was involved in this miracle? The son, obviously, but also the woman and Elijah, because it kept Elijah alive too. Okay? And what happened? The preservation of life, both for the son and for the adults in the story. Now the question is, why did all this happen? So that just one woman would have her life, her son's life, preserved. Now that's a lot of God work for just one person. You think it was just for one person? I think it's so that people would hear the story over and over and over. Now I've heard some interesting interpretations of how that happened. Again, I'm just trusting what the story says. Some people have said that when he put himself on the boy 3 times, it was like CPR. Or that the boy had just passed out and, brought him back to life that way. Who knows? Who knows? But somehow or another, Elijah asked, and God worked through him. And did it in a way so that people could see. He took him up in the room by himself, but he brought that boy back down. He carried him up dead and brought him back alive. People would see that and would hear about it. Can you imagine what stories that boy would have to tell? Can you imagine what near-death stories he would have to tell? Can you imagine his mother if she had told about the flour and the oil lasting and lasting and lasting? Now, one of the things that says to me, again, that what I need, God's going to provide. This is kind of like the story, of around the Torah, when they were out of oil in the temple. And it lasted and lasted and lasted. And somebody said the way to explain that is that if your cell phone, like my watch is right now, on 2% battery, and it lasted for another 8 days, that would be a miracle. That would be a miracle. So we're going to stop at this one, and we'll look at the last 3 next week and a couple more that didn't make it to the list this time. Especially want you to look at the story in 2 Kings, both of those. And then, of course, the Daniel one. And you've got the who, what, when, where idea with it. Think about what you think, not just about who it was, what happened, and why, but how it applies today. Because I believe these stories have been preserved through history to give us an idea of how things work, to give us an idea of what can be done through us and for us. Comments, reactions, gripes, giggles? All right, well, thank you all for coming out tonight. Let's have a closing prayer. Loving God, we thank you that you're still in the miracle working business. Sometimes those miracles are just so obvious to us, and other times, like we said earlier, they're small things that we don't even recognize. You took care of this widow, you took care of the other people we've talked about, and you fulfilled your promises, and you have not gone out of business. Give us the courage as individuals and as a church to believe that your promises are still true. And when you say go, to go, when you say stop, to stop, when you say speak, to speak, so that no donkeys have to come and help us. In your name we pray. Amen.